Hi, it's Steve from Parts Select. In this video, we'll share with you some tips on how to get your lawnmower in top working condition. Now, the first thing we've done is to elevate that lawnmower to a position where we can easily work on it. And the first thing we're going to check is the drive wheels on it. We want to make sure that they turn freely, that the hubs aren't worn out completely, and particularly if you have a self-propelled model, you'll want to make sure that you still have lots of tread left on those wheels. If not, now's the time to order replacements. Next, we'll look at the cord for the recoil starter. And this particular one shows a fair bit of wear on the upper portion here. So we're going to want to replace that before it breaks just when we need it the most. As well, this particular model uses a grass catcher bag, so we'll inspect that carefully. If there's any signs of tears or damage to it, you'll want to order a replacement for that as well. Next, we'll look at any cables. If it's a throttle cable or a self-drive cable or the engine brake cable, inspect those for any signs of fraying or damage. And again, if anything shows up there, you'll want to replace that right now. Now that we've checked out all of those items and determined what we needed to replace, we're going to turn our attention to the engine. And as mentioned, the first thing we're going to do is make sure that we've got all of the fuel out of that tank, and then we can start to do our maintenance. Now that we have our fuel tank drained, we're ready to drain the oil out of the crankcase. This particular model doesn't have a drain plug on the bottom of the crankcase, so we're going to have to drain it out through the fill spout, which means we're going to have to tilt that mower on its side. Now, in this particular model, the engine cover is kind of in the way of that fill spout for the engine oil, so we'll need to remove that cover first. Now, the recoil starter cord is in the way of that, so we're going to need to detach that from the handle, and then we can lift that cover off, and then we can go ahead and drain that oil. Now, when draining the oil from this, we've relocated it to a lower surface just to make it a little safer to work with. We're next going to remove the fill cap for dipstick and just set that aside, and have a container large enough to collect all of the oil. Now, we want to make sure that we get all of that old used oil out of that crankcase, so that may involve tilting the mower back up on its edge for a bit and then lowering it back down to make sure that we've got all the nooks and crannies inside of our crankcase. Now that we have our crankcase oil completely drained out, we're ready to put the mower back up on its stand where we continue to do our maintenance. Now, the next step in our maintenance will be to look at the air filter. The air filter is important because we want to make sure that we don't get any dirt entering our fuel air system. So we'll begin by removing the cover on this particular model. It's held in place with a single screw. As you can see, there's been a fair bit of dirt that is built up on the bottom of that. And we actually recommend that you change that filter at the beginning of each mowing season, and then periodically throughout the season inspect it and clean it if necessary. So we're just going to discard the old filter and replace it. But while we have that off, we now have access to our carburetor. So we'll want to make sure that no dirt has gotten into there. And if you wish, just take some carburetor cleaner, spray that in there, allow that to soak, then again drain that tank. We'll also inspect the primer bulb. Make sure that there's no signs of cracking, or if it's dried out and gotten quite brittle, you'll want to replace that as well. Now that we have our carburetor cleaned and our new primer bulb installed, we're now ready to put our new air filter on. Now, we've chosen the complete kit, which comes with the filter, housing, and a new gasket. Now, before we install the air filter, we want to follow the manufacturer's instructions for this, which basically entail removing the filter from the housing, and then we're going to saturate that with engine oil, clean engine oil, and then we'll remove the excess, place it back in the housing, and then we'll set that housing on top of the carburetor. Now again, remember to check that filter periodically throughout the mowing season. You can remove that filter media, clean it in just warm soapy water, rinse it well and dry it well, and remember to saturate it with engine oil again, rinsing out any excess, place it back in the holder, and you're good to go. Now that we've taken care of all of our fuel system, next we're going to look at our spark plug. We'll begin by pulling the cap off the plug and just inspect the inside of that cap. Look for any signs of arcing or corrosion, and if there is any, you may need to replace the ignition itself. And next we'll remove the plug. As we look at that plug, it doesn't appear to be in too bad a shape. There's not too much in the line of a buildup on that. However, we do recommend that you change the plug at the start of every season. So we're just going to go ahead and discard the old one and make sure we have the proper one to replace it with, and then carefully thread it by hand into the engine block, and then we'll tighten it with our ratchet. And make sure that the ignition wire fits nice and snug on top of that. Now that we've replaced our spark plug, we're ready to move on. The next thing we'll want to look at is the muffler. Just do a visual inspection, see if there's any amount of rust or corrosion on it, and if so, you'll probably want to replace that. We previously determined that we needed to replace that starter cord, so we're just going to go ahead, remove the housing from the engine, and we'll do that change. And now we'll take this off, where we're going to set it on a suitable work surface and change out that cord. Now that we have that sitting on a suitable work surface, and we know that the recoil portion of that works just fine, it's just the cord that we need to replace. Basically, all we're going to do is fully extend that cord, then we'll clamp that pulley from moving, disconnect the cord from it. So we'll just take our new one, we'll line it up with the old one. It's only a few inches longer, so we won't bother cutting anything off of that. Now next, we're going to thread that new cord into the recoil housing. And now we're ready to put this assembly back on the mower. Now with the housing secured to the engine block, we're ready to put the cover back on. Now that we're done with the engine, other than adding the oil, before we do that, we're going to flip the mower on its side. Now we've gone ahead and cleaned out some of the debris, caked on grass and mud that was underneath of here. Now when cleaning that away, we've see a little bit of surface rust on here, nothing to get too excited about yet. So now that we know the mower deck is in good shape, we'll next look at the blade itself. Now it is important that we keep that blade as sharp as possible all season long. The sharper the blade is, the better it'll cut grass and the easier it is on your mower. You can simply remove that blade and sharpen it on a bench grinder, or if it's in really bad shape or if it has been sharpened a number of times, you may wish to replace it. To do so, we simply need to remove the mounting nut that goes into the crankshaft, and make sure that you have protective gloves on, and then give it a sharp snap towards you while holding the blade with the opposite hand. With the blade off, we can then carefully inspect the cutting edge to make sure that there are no large gouges or chips in it. We can also verify that the blade is still straight. If it's bent, you get an uneven cut and also cause excess vibration with your engine, which could damage it over the long run. Now, this one does have a few chips in it, so we're just going to go ahead and replace it. Now as well, you also want to inspect this drive block that slides over the crankshaft. The center hub is what drives the blade, and if that blade was loose at any time or not put on properly, you may have incurred some damage to this center hub, and if so, you'll need to replace that. It simply slides off the shaft, and you can pick up a replacement part for that. Now when replacing a blade, obviously we want to make sure that we have the proper replacement blade. In this case, we've chosen a mulching type blade, which actually has two cutting surfaces, one higher than the other. Make sure it's placed firmly over that hub and that the guide pins fit into the holes in the blade. And we need to tighten that securely. And again, you'll need to grasp that blade. Be sure to wear protective gloves. So now we're ready to replace our engine oil. We'll begin by removing the filler cap dipstick. Be sure to select the proper engine oil for your mower. And we are right at the full mark. Tighten the cap securely. Now that we've topped off the oil, again, it is important throughout the mowing season to check that every time you use your mower. Make sure you keep the levels at full, but always be cautious that you don't overfill your mower. We certainly hope that you enjoyed this video and that these tips will help you get your mower running in tip-top condition. For more videos on appliance repair, maintenance, and cleaning tips, be sure to visit our website. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure to subscribe.